Today I sat down with Dr. Geoff Smart, who is the founder of ghSMART, a $100+ million business that focuses on helping unlock the powers of hiring the right people, training leadership, working with government and beyond. It's really an impressive 27-year journey that he's been on. What's more impressive, to me at least, is the fact that he wrote literally the book on hiring called Who the A Method for Hiring. And there is just so much value in this episode, sitting down with Geoff, who for me, and I went short of calling him literally an idol of mine, but one of the nicest guys, so open, and it's no surprise that he's been able to build a business to the level that it has, and I will not be surprised when I hear how far he takes it. So again, this is one to listen to, one not to miss out on. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did recording it. It was a lot of fun. Welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I talk to world-class professionals on what it takes to scale successful businesses. I dive deep asking questions to people who are running unicorn businesses, to raising funds, to buying businesses, mergers and acquisitions, IP and patent law, what is to manage performance management. I mean, the list goes on. The idea really is, how do I create knowledge and learning for you guys listening in? And of course, myself, getting the floor with people who I, in many cases, would never dream to share a room with. Before we jump into the episode, I've got to give a special thank you to our sponsors. Firstly, over at Global Wide Advisors, a leading digital consumer products investment bank focused on optimizing the sales process. An incredible team, always happy to pick up the phone and educate you or anyone about the sales process and what you should really consider, and can obviously help take you to market or even acquire businesses. I ring them for just about everything these days. Us over at Multiply Me, we are the end-to-end executive search and HR function into the Philippines, helping find better talent and onboarding them effectively. And last but not least, Escala, our management consultancy focused on process improvement, where we help build better systems for your business. That's all the ads you're going to get from me, ladies and gentlemen. The rest is all about learning. I hope you really enjoy and get as much out of these sessions as I do, sitting face-to-face with some of the world-renowned leaders in their respective fields, asking them the tough questions that they're not often asked. Today, I'm very fortunate to have the pleasure of sitting down with none other than Dr. Geoff Smart. Geoff, welcome to Successful Scales.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Yoni. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I am honestly, I was sort of telling you before we hit record, but I'm being so excited about the opportunity to sit here and be able to pick your brain, because you as an individual, but also the team that you pulled together to bring together Who the A Method for Hiring, fundamentally changed the trajectory of, honestly, my life. Not to sort of overplay it, but if it wasn't for...
No, you can overplay it. People who write books, it's a painful process. And if it made an impact, we certainly like to hear it.
So, well, I'm telling you, I'm telling you really directly here, if it wasn't for the book, and if it wasn't for us taking it as a baseline in how we run our hiring process and methodology through Multiply Me, there's no way that we'd be able to achieve the growth and sustained growth that we have. So, it's a special episode for me. So I really just appreciate you taking the time and being so open to coming on.
Absolutely. Well, I'm pleased that the book content's been helpful, and if we can bring it even more alive for your listeners and viewers, this is a great privilege. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I am not going to do a good enough job, even though I am done my research and homework to the nth degree on you. So rather than me butcher it, I'd love to just pass it over and have you talk to those who don't know you or haven't read the book or aren't particularly familiar, a little bit about your journey, and spare no detail because I would love to obviously hear it.
Well, sure. So the summary of it is, I'm Geoff Smart. I'm the chairman and founder of ghSMART, which is a global leadership consultancy. And over the years, we've collected so much data from the work that we've done. I founded the firm 27 years ago, that every few years for the last 15 years, we've written a book. And the goal with the books is to take this valuable data. The Who book was based on 10,000 cases of successful and unsuccessful careers and really look from a more of a quantitative and data-driven approach to what works and what doesn't work to hire and develop talented teams and to be successful as a leader. So my day job is growing this consultancy. And then, episodically, my colleagues and I have written these books, which have done surprisingly well, and we're still talking about them. So that's who I am. I have 9 children. We're blended and have some of our own. So I'm a very, very full-time husband and dad, and occasional author and podcast contributor.
Wow. I mean, so much. Firstly, 9 children, that would keep anyone busy. But from that
yes.
to running, the business that you're running, the consultancy, plus the book, it just puts me straight in the position of how do you find time for it all?
Well, and this sounds extremely self-serving, but if we didn't practice what we preach around hiring and delegating, you kind of can't do it all. So when I founded ghSMART a long time ago, I remember a mentor said, you can either hire dumb people and work 100 hours a week and micromanage them, or you can hire people who are actually smarter than you are and give them more freedom and opportunity to be creative. And then here's the secret is then, you don't have to follow up and double check their work. And instead you could be more in a position of being a strategist and a recruiter, and then really get out of the way and let your team work their magic. So I from the very beginning, designed ghSMART to have a culture that would attract and retain great people. And so it's been a lot of fun. All the things that we wrote about in the Who book are tactics that we also practice at the firm. So we know that they work.
So I'd just love to get a bit of clarity on the timeline, because like I was saying, at the start of it, Who has been fundamentally like a paradigm shift in, and I don't want to give too much away because I'm going to let you talk about these things, but, I used to walk into an interview and I'd ask questions and it would be how I felt on the day. And there was none of this real clarity on, and I'm sure most people listening and most people through their career, unless they've read a book like Who, or they've done the work, or they're really at the top of their game, it takes a bit of time to understand, how do you build a formulaic approach to actually understanding who is a right fit. So back to my question was, what was the timeline? So you started ghSMART.
Sure. Timeline. Yeah. So here, let's back it up to, it's the summer of 1990. I'm an undergraduate at Northwestern University in Chicago, and I'm studying economics. And like everybody else in the mid-90s, I thought, I'd probably go into investment banking or consulting. But I really was fascinated with topics of leadership and management. And during an internship, are you venture backed at all for any of your ventures, or have you bootstrapped all this?
It's all bootstrapped. We're about to with this new venture. It's going to be there's going to be a credit facility attached, but it's all bootstrapped.
Yes. All right. Well, good for you for bootstrapping. The venture capital industry was just kind of getting extra hot in the mid 1990s, and I thought, it'd be interesting because during an internship, all of these senior people around me, these experienced pros, were telling me it's not as important what you invest in as who you invest in. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting, but riddle me this. Then why are all these methods geared for doing market due diligence and financial due diligence? And there are all these approaches to systematically gathering information and making good decisions on things like product and money and markets, but there didn't really seem to be a comparable level of rigor around figuring out the people part. So it was just sort of a passive observation. I wonder if there were ways to improve bets on people and really get to know the people that investors are investing in. Would that show up in more successful companies, lower failure rates, higher returns on investment? And so it was such an interesting topic that I then went off and studied industrial psychology, is what they called it back then. Today it's just plain old psychology, in Los Angeles with Peter Drucker, the father of management.
Yeah, wow.
So Peter Drucker's out there back in the mid 90s at Claremont, and I was able to study with him and to shape the vision for what became ghSMART and what became the Who book and the other books we've written, which was just simply this concept. The concept was, does it have to be this gut feel crapshoot the process of either hiring people or developing leaders, or in the very specific niche I was interested in, and the way that venture capital investors decided who to invest in. And so I committed all my time, my passion, career planning around getting as expert as I could get around this one topic of picking people and helping them be successful. So flash forward, I started ghSMART while I was still in graduate school, because what I was finding was there are already proven methods out here in the world of psychology for how to do interviews well, for example. And so through testing these out and then measuring whether or not they ended up leading to less failure and more return on investments, I basically honed some of the early tactics that became the Who book much later. So it was basically 1995, I found ghSMART. I'm still in grad school. I finished it in 98. By then we already had clients and we had people on staff. We sort of started with a contractor model early on because I didn't have any money or people or clients, or ironically, I didn't want to get venture funding back then. I thought I wanted to test the market first before, really getting serious about it. But what I found was, whether you're a venture capital investor, a board member of a giant global 2000 company, an entrepreneur, or really any hiring manager, people really wanted better methods for hiring and developing their teams. So back in the olden days, the topic wasn't widely known as like the topic in business, but over the last 5 or 10 years or so, Yoni, it's been great, because if you look at surveys from the conference boards, big global think tank, or Harvard Business School, what's on the mind of CEOs and entrepreneurs, it's basically either digital disruption or talent are the number 1 and 2, or 2 and 1 on all these surveys out of 30 or 40 topics. So the timeline's simple. Basically, I'm an undergrad who knows nothing. Then I become a PhD student who knows nothing. And then suddenly I stumble on this idea that, if we could bring rigorous, fact-based, data-driven methods to making people decisions, I think, scarce capital could flow to the right leaders who could then create amazing products and amazing businesses out of them, rather than scarce capital flowing to the wrong hands, and then it's all wasted. So it's a little bit of a missionary sort of like, I think this market needs it. And the other reason, and then I'll be quiet about the origin story here, is I really didn't want to go line up on Wall Street, with the 100 other starting classmates and kind of march along to this sort of more fixed, one-size-fits-all career experience. I thought, okay, I personally would like to have more control and freedom in my career to learn and do what I want. And if I could create a culture that supported that, I think I could attract great people. So that was the second bet. First bet was, would the customers buy it? And the second bet was, could we attract the right people, really high caliber professionals, to come and work on these projects for these influential leaders. So that was the very, very early years. And then, it's basically a very linear growth from 1995 to today. And we've published 4 books along the way on how to hire. That's the Who book. How to lead your team. That's the Power Score book. We did a book on leadership in government called Leadocracy. And then my colleagues, not I, but using the same big, now giant data set, published The CEO Next Door just a couple of years ago, which also became a New York Times bestseller. And that's on how to become CEO. So it's basically a consultancy in a niche new area on a topic that has become very popular: hiring, developing talented teams using methods that, in my humble opinion, most of what is in the Who book was already discovered 50, 100 years ago in this little field of industrial psychology. We sort of identified them, drew them out, and then tested them and then honed them. So that's what ended up being the Who book.
So I got one more question about sort of that timeline, or more so around the decision around creating the Who book. That really is like, you've started the consultancy, you're moving through, you're building obviously momentum, and you have clarity and understanding. You can't have that without creating a book like Who. What was the purpose? Like, what drew you? Was it, I want to just create value in the world? Was it, this is a lead magnet, in today's online perception? What's the why behind Who?
Yeah, I think the why behind Who was credibility building. At the time, we drew together the lessons, and then we did a whole bunch of more original research beyond the 10,000 interviews we had already conducted and drew clues about what worked and didn't work and all these hiring approaches. We use it as an excuse to go meet more influential leaders. I personally interviewed over 20 self-made billionaire entrepreneurs for the Who book. When you write a book, you get an excuse to call up whoever you want. And I was shocked. So many of them, our goal is to get 5, self-made entrepreneurial billionaires to share their best secrets. We got 20. They kept referring us to their friends. They'd say, "Oh, hey, you should talk to so-and-so." So as a way to accelerate learning, build credibility, and actually just, even hone our approach, it was just a helpful vehicle for that. You don't make a lot of money when you write books, unless you're J.K. Rowling. I think something like 1 in 10,000 books actually ever even breaks even. I mean, that's a dismal number,
wow.
Right? So you definitely want to write a book either to learn and build expertise, to gain access to people and meet them and build relationships, or to codify a framework that then allows you to have extra credibility when you go to these, in our case, boards, CEOs, heads of state, and say like, "Oh, hey, we have something valuable to say." Because it really was much easier to get them to rely on us as their trusted advisor if we say, "Hey, these, where do these methods come from? Did someone just cook it up on a Saturday?" Like, no, it's based on a $100 million then database on 10,000 executive careers and the lessons that came out of all that data. And then they say, "Okay, great. Well, that could help us as well." So I'd say those are the reasons. And then it was just kind of fun. And you get like there's some guy in former Soviet Georgia who will send me an email on a Saturday saying, "Hey, I built 2 businesses using the Who approach. It's amazing. Thank you for writing the book." I mean, it is so fun if you have something of value and you get it out to the whole world, you just hear these stories of how people use it and it helps elevate their quality of life and improve their performance as leaders. So that's kind of the why behind books 2, 3, and 4, was just that feeling of wanting to take something that is useful and get it out to more people. We don't really land that many clients from the books. It's more of, I don't know, it's sort of like half branding and half, social impact, as I guess the summary answer to the question of why do the books.
I mean, it probably helps to win clients when you say, "Well, we wrote the book on hiring."
Right. That's right. Our competitors have read the best book on hiring. Where if you want the folks who actually wrote it, that does deliver a bit of a higher level of credibility.
Definitely. So to that point, obviously, I'm like acutely familiar with Who, and I've read it. In all honesty, cover it to cover a couple of times, to the point where I put a presentation to pitch it to the rest of the business to understand like why this is something that we need to get going and why it's important. But I guess for those who aren't as familiar, and obviously we're going to put a link in the show notes, and I really invite everyone to get a copy because I've said it enough times, it's really changed our business. What's it about? What's the key points and what's sort of the value proposition? And I'll pass it over to you. I could do it myself, but I feel like, I've got you here.
Sure.
You're probably the right person to ask.
Yeah, it's literally a solution to the number one problem in business. And we're not here to say the number one problem in business is hiring talented teams. That's what, sort of other large global surveys say. So number one problem in business, it's a simple solution. And we later identified that only 14% of leaders are good at hiring. 14%. So that means, the vast majority of people, as you said earlier in the podcast, haven't taken a class on it, haven't necessarily, read a book on it, or they don't teach you these things at university, right? So it's no wonder that so many people struggle with hiring. But it is a book based on data and methods to identify what not to do to avoid pitfalls, and then to provide this like 4-step process for good hiring, which when you say it out loud, Yoni, it sounds really obvious, but we say it does sound like common sense, but it is very uncommon practice to follow the 4 steps of good hiring.
Which is, that's source, select, sell is the last one.
Yeah, that's right. And don't forget scorecard,
which is
that's right.
the most critical. And
Sure.
I'll add to your your position. Like I'd say like the paradigm shift for me when I was reading the book, and the thing that I kept referring back to is, when you're going through the process of understanding, rather than, like I often say to people, like, what's people's typical approach? They'll look for Indeed or Monster, they'll pull a job description, they'll say, sure, I'll just hire for that person. And the way you sort of break it down from the mission, outcome, and attributes, where you define a very simple mission, what are the outcomes needed to achieve that mission, and then what attributes should that person actually have in order to select it, which builds your scorecard. I mean, like,
that's right.
That is, that's, again, one element of this 4-part framework that, again, goes a whole lot deeper.
Yeah, that's right. So let's double click on scorecard for a moment. And I think you're right. That it's the first step, but it's super critical. I think many people are busy at work. And so you need to hire somebody, make some broad general assumption about, I need to hire a marketing person. We should hire a marketing person. But it's like, what does that even mean? So I think people are naturally very vague in the way in which they hire talent. And so the elements of the scorecard take something that's vague and make it more actionable and more specific. And we say the more specific, the better. So as you mentioned, the mission is just a simple statement of what this role is all about. Let's say it's a marketing person, for example. Well, is this about general brand strategy? Is this that kind of marketing person? Or is the mission more around selling more stuff to existing customers? Or is this about, digitizing and creating a whole new suite of services? Or is it about going global? Like, what are we talking about here? What's the mission? And you can't have a mission with too many points of focus. It's important to really choose and do the hard work to narrow it down to the core elements that matter most. So mission is just simply the focused reason for the job's existence. And then the outcomes sound harder than they are, but we don't let you, get off the hook by saying, oh yeah, we want to have this marketing person support our product development efforts. It's like, well, that's pretty vague. Instead, it's a lot of, there's a good book I'll recommend. We don't know the authors and we don't get any royalties. 4 Disciplines of Execution is an excellent book. 40X, great book on how to write goals or how to write scorecards for roles. And their method, and I'm giving them full credit for this, is you say, we want to grow something from X to Y by a certain date. From X to Y by a certain date. We want to increase from having 2 products to having 4 profitable products by 12/31/2023. But getting very specific on the X, the Y, and the date makes you then more specific about the talent you're really looking for. So I think I couldn't emphasize enough the importance of articulating measurable goals in your scorecard. And dream a little. Sometimes, Yoni, entrepreneurs will say, well, I don't know, like, do we say we want to build $1 trillion business in 2 years? Well, no, you don't say that, right? Because that's not helpful. But what you do is you set the bar at the level at which you and other owners or founders would be thrilled with the performance. And so by allocating actual measurable goals to the scorecard, it not only gets your mind in the right frame of mind as you start doing interviews, because you know what to look for, but it also narrows down a very large talent pool to the subspecialties that matter most. And then the competencies, that's kind of like a checklist almost. With your businesses, you have a culture in different businesses. Maybe there's a culture of speed in one business. Maybe there's a culture of thoroughness in another business. Maybe there's a culture of over communication in one business. Maybe there's a culture of discretion in another business. Culture is very, very, very important. And if you can identify what are the core elements of culture that we really want everybody at the firm to demonstrate, those are kind of like a checklist that go in at the end of the scorecard. So that's it. It's basically mission, outcomes, and competencies. And it takes about, half an hour or 45 minutes with your inner circle to really hash out, what do we really need this person to achieve in this role? Once you're done with the scorecard, you're well on your way to good hiring. But if you skip the scorecard step, forget it. You're living in the land of vagueness and generality. It makes it nearly impossible to have hiring success.
Yeah. I mean, I just eat all of this stuff up. 40X, we actually went through, we took management through a 40X 3-day seminar, and we built our WIG, our wildly important goal,
Yes.
and the lead measures that would yield the outcomes. And yeah, I mean, I think, like, again, I'm someone who's just forever curious about all of these methodologies. I don't know if I'd love to actually know, have you ever delved into the world? Like, are you Gino Wickman and Traction, EOS? Are you familiar with that whole community?
Less so. I'm in YPO, so there was some YPO thing I was at a few, like maybe a year ago on that, and I was impressed that it was codified. It seemed to have all the key, elements present. I'm a little bit agnostic to some of these operating systems. The Vern Harnish, scaling up stuff, all that's great. Yep. Basically, I think there's a huge difference if you're an entrepreneur from going seat of your pants, gut feel, intuition on everything, to having really any operating method where you have to give thought to the people part, you have to give thought to products, you have to give thoughts to customers, you have some sort of checklist for key questions we're going to want to ask and measure around financials. So I think they're all good. Even John Doerr, a famous venture capitalist, came out with Measure What Matters. He has a whole system for goal setting and accountability. But yeah, basically set goals, figure out what the goals should be. That's hard work. It's hard work to prioritize. In our research, we found that successful teams were good at prioritizing. So we're talking teams here for a sec, a little departure from just hiring individuals, but teams that are 20 times more likely to achieve their goals are good at three things, and you have to be good at all three things. And the three things are prioritizing, yes, hiring, of course, hiring and firing to build talent on the team. And the third one is they build relationships focused on results. So they prioritize, they hire and fire well, and they build relationships focused on results. And we found that only 24% of leaders and their teams were good at prioritizing. And most of the time, when they're bad at prioritizing, it's because they don't have a system like what you're talking about, either Traction or 4DX. Or they don't have a method for taking a bunch of different things and narrowing them down to the goals that matter most. But if you're really good, the number of goals isn't like 75, it's like 3. And you and I have been around the entrepreneurial block long enough that when you hear someone who sounds like they have just too many areas of focus, there's a term in psychology called diffusion of responsibility, where then it's just you diffuse energy across too many things. You don't really get that hyper growth that you're looking for. But if you do the hard work to narrow it down to the few things that matter most, and then you hire and measure, set goals, accountability just on these few priorities that matter most, that's when you see the real breakaway success stories of scaling.
Totally. It's simplicity over complexity. Like, just get something out into market, get it going, stay focused. And to your point, you come across some brilliant minds, but ideas are a dime a dozen. And unless you can really codify it into some form of execution that the team can get around, then it becomes very, very challenging to see the upside of what that, big vision potential.
Exactly. There's a weird maturation as you're talking. I feel like you went through it clearly because of the success you've had. I went through it as an entrepreneur, where I think when you're younger, you think complexity, well, that's cool. That means intelligence. And that means, you can, all the lingo, and you're, boy, are you smart. But as you talk to enough people, you study enough businesses that have been very successful, you realize that simplicity is the premium. That's the impressive thing, much more so than complexity. So, and same with,
Or I'd say, or to the point that you made earlier, is effective delegation. So you can have the most complex or running multiple businesses, but unless you give, hyper accountability and extreme ownership to individuals where they are the decision-making keys, and you're no longer the bottleneck, that's, and so,
yes.
I mean, in my experience, and especially since I've had the opportunity to interview so many people, I feel like one of those challenges is that they either want to be the decision maker and they have so many ideas and they can't spread thin enough, or they've got just so many ideas and, they fail to build any alignment around how it's executed by even very competent members.
Agreed.
So I'm going to ask you what I think is actually a tough question.
I'm bracing for it. Okay, I'm bracing for it. Yes.
Yeah, mate, brace for this one, because I wrote it down beforehand. I'm like, geez, that's a tough one. But I feel like if anyone's got the answer, it's going to be you. But how can a company actually quantify the value of an effective hire? So what's the true cost of failure, and what would your definition of success actually look like when they go through the hiring process?
All right. Well, okay. I think I can do this one. So let's see here. Before I founded my company, I collaborated with my father, who also was in the field of industrial psychology. We did a research study when we were creating top grading, which is this method for upgrading the talent in your organization. And so I was an economics undergrad at the time, so everything to me was quantifiable, right? So I said to my father, I said, hey, let's quantify what getting hiring wrong costs. And we thought, this is great. Let's go ahead. So we went out to, I'm going to get the numbers wrong because it's been a couple decades, but the data, is still, the findings are still relevant today. Where I think we looked at something like 100 companies, and we just basically said, hey, look, let's talk about hiring success rates. Let's talk about the cost to hire people. Let's talk about the costs and benefits. And on the benefits of hiring someone who is a high performer versus someone who isn't and who leaves, what's the sort of differential on the value they deliver, and then what are all the costs associated? Basically, just think high performer, benefits cost, low performer, benefits cost. And what we found was that the difference that it costs 15 times a person's annual salary when you make a hiring mistake in actual out-of-pocket cost, as well as the opportunity cost difference between if you had hired a high performer rather than a low performer. So that's early research. That very much lined up with Peter Drucker, my old mentor's observation that his numbers were that there was a hiring mistake 50% of the time in the world. So, and you asked, how do you measure, or how do you define what a hiring mistake is? Peter Drucker defined it as a year after you hired the person, are you happy you hired them or not? It's kind of binary, after a year, right? So was that a good hiring decision or bad? And we don't need to overcomplicate it, but basically after any of your listeners have hired someone a year later, are they glad they did so or not? So the big value shift here is if 50% of the time people are making hiring mistakes, how can you improve that with following the 4 steps of good hiring in the Who book? Our experience, both observing it with client companies as well as just people out there in the wild, as well as looking at half a century of research on this topic, suggests that you can achieve 90% hiring success if you follow the 4 steps in the Who book. And the difference between 90% and 50% hiring success has a lot of economic value there. If you multiply the number of hires times 15 times their salary, there's the long, wonky answer to your question. I'll tell you, I was on a stage 2 weeks ago at an investor conference, and someone asked that exact question in the audience. They said, okay, I get it. We're supposed to, Jim Collins told us, right? Get the right people on the bus in the right seats. I get it. But, this stuff takes time. This stuff's expensive. What is the economic value? And another person in the audience, this guy raised his hand. He said, hey, I heard ghSMART talk about 15 years ago, and I switched my whole leadership approach from focusing, he said, on product was what his real passion was at the time, to focusing on talent and just starting to practice all the Who stuff. And his business was worth $30 million US 15 years ago when he heard us speak, and it was kind of flatline. It wasn't growing. And then he changed his approach to be more compliant with the Who approach. And after 10 years of doing that, they exited that business for $3.5 billion. And so he was telling the person who asked the question, does this have any value? Or is this like hocus pocus? He's basically like, it's the reason we were able to, grow a very valuable business. So I think, common sense wise and just personally, it's very painful and costly when you make a hiring mistake. You feel bad. The person feels bad. Maybe they left another perfectly good job to join your company and it doesn't work out. I mean, the sort of social and psychological costs alone are horrendous when you make a hiring mistake. But the economic costs are measured and proven to be, quite significant. So that's the kind of economics of taking a more talent-focused Who approach to being a leader versus trying to cut corners and hope and pray that that the talent that joins your team is the right talent.
And how good that
I felt so good.
Shared his
I actually asked him after. I was like, thank you so much. That wasn't even a planted audience member, but it's enough in any size room of any number of leaders of any size organizations. It's actually just, so it's just you and me today. But if we had a bunch of people, it's such an easy question to say, how hard is hiring, or why is it hard, and who has any war stories of what the value of getting it right is, that just pops like popcorn. People have all sorts of great examples of going from a value destroying approach of just fast bets and intuition, betting on people, churning people, and the destruction that does for your culture and for your brand, versus getting it right 90% of the time and really building a team of what I was just sending out some congratulations messages this morning to a couple of colleagues. Beth from my team has been with our firm 17 years today. So when you hire well and you provide a good culture to retain people, I mean, just think about how much more valuable Beth is with 17 years of experience of taking care of clients and taking care of colleagues and knowing her way around, versus if you have, everybody's been here for 3 months or 6 months kind of thing.
Well, you know what? That leads me to my next couple of questions. Congratulations.
Yeah, 17 years.
By the way. That's an amazing achievement. We were talking a little bit before, and, we were talking a little bit about, I think it was Vault and some of the industry sort of practices. And I mean, where does, you guys are literally, like I keep saying, you wrote the book on hiring, but where do you sit when it comes to sort of the industry best practices or standards as it relates to?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. I used to think that, so let's see here. Let me hit the punchline answer to your question first, and then a little bit of background. So in 2022, ghSMART won #1 Vault ranked for best consulting firm in our whole industry to work for in 4 categories, which is really cool. The best category is just overall employee satisfaction. So our firm, we practice what we preach. We have rigorous hiring. We're really careful. We hire folks. We build a great culture. We have a no jerks policy at the firm. So people don't quit jobs. They quit jerky bosses, right? So guess what? If you improve your hiring, you don't have jerky bosses. You have less turnover. So we have single digit turnover, rank 1 on Volt across all industry players in consulting, for overall satisfaction, for client interaction, for challenging work. And we were the top boutique firm on the kind of aggregate scores also. And then do you guys have Glassdoor in Tel Aviv, and do you care? Yeah, so Glassdoor is a nice measure, of culture also. And we're at 4.8 out of 5, which is tops in our industry. Really hard to do. And if you look on there and you look on the scores and you ask the question, why is it? Why is it that people rate the scores so high? They point to that freedom element that I mentioned at the beginning of our podcast, where if you build a culture where you have really good hiring, and then you give very high performing people kind of an unusual amount of freedom to do the work how they creatively feel like they can do it best, and not micromanage and not coerce and not second guess, but instead have a culture of freedom and transparency. That's at least what they say, keeps them coming back for 17 years and why they score the culture so high. But I really think that like the value chain looks something like you craft the culture to be able to attract the talent. Then you use the hiring approach, right? The who approach to hire with low failure rates. And then it's those talented people who are talented, diverse, good-hearted people who then innovate the best products and deliver the best service for customers, right? And then, and if you have this, talented, good-hearted, diverse team creating amazing value for customers and treating each other really well, of course, revenue and profits and shareholders are happy after that. So I think the value chain, begins right here at culture and talent. And honestly, I can't think of something that can positively affect the culture of your businesses out there more than getting hiring right. Because when you get hiring right and you really have, literally by definition, the people who embody the values you're looking for, and everybody is, highly reliable and respectful, then it makes it just very difficult for people to consider leaving a place like that.
Absolutely. When I mean, it's all well and good, for anyone listening in. It's obviously all well and good to talk about the hiring process, getting the right people, and love. I was going to say before, with the business that eventually sold for $3.5 billion, if it had maybe sat 15 years in market, Jim Collins might have wanted to look under the hood and seen how how you actually impacted that growth. That could have been part of the case study for future books. But when it comes to actually fostering that culture and handling leadership and making sure that you've got the right people in the business, what how do you take it from a good hire?
Sure. And, our thinking's evolved a bit, I'd say, just to be candid and transparent. I used to think that just making good hires individually was the challenge. But assembling the team with complementary skill sets today is where we sit at ghSMART on what the ultimate goal is. And I think that's because the world is very complex, and it's just hard to find people who are good at many different things. It's kind of this increased specialist world we live in. So being able to piece together a team that has the right skill sets is of critical importance. And the only real headlines that we have on what do you do once you've hired the people is to have a conversation and the accountability as a team for are we doing the right things well or not well. I mentioned the three elements that in our research suggests that a team will be 20 times more likely to achieve their goals. We call it having a power conversation. So the power is P, W, and R. It's priorities, who, and relationships. And we do this with clients. We do this in our firm. We do this with governments. I mean, it doesn't matter the organization, but if you basically have conversations regularly, quarterly or monthly, et cetera, where you say, hey, do we have the right priorities? What are the priorities? Like what are we focused on? I'm having very open dialogue about what's important today. I think that clarity is required for your team to know where to focus scarce energy. Who do we have? Okay. And at all levels, from the senior executive team on down, what percent of our team is performing very well? What percent of our team is performing below expectation? Really tracking and measuring to know, are we healthy? Do we have the right people? And then the relationship thing sounds fuzzy, but it's not that fuzzy if you just look at as a leader. Okay, let me think of the 10 relationships that matter most to me. Let me score them 1 to 10. Whether it's internally or with key customers or suppliers or partners, et cetera. Where are the 9s and 10s where you say, great, keep up the good work? Where are the 3s or 4s, where you say, some immediate attention is needed? And picture like spaghetti with different colors, where you're the meatball in the middle, and you have all the spaghetti. These are the relationships you have coming off of you as the CEO or the leader. Is that a yellow? Is that a green? Is it a yellow? Is it a red? Just really understanding where the relationships are working well and not well, and talking about it openly as a team. So measuring your power score as a team by asking the questions out loud and having discussions around priorities, who, and relationships, we find is a great way to then get the team really playing to their strengths and bonding and performing well. It's more than just trust. I don't like it when people sometimes ask me, once you have all these talented people, and then the goal is just building trust. I think trust is more of an outcome of high performance than a cause of it. In my humble opinion, this is not based on our database, but just observing thousands of successful and unsuccessful entrepreneurs. I don't think trust is the thing that you want to focus on as a team. I think performance is the thing you want to focus on a team. And then if you have a high performing team of great people, sure, they're gonna trust each other.
And I would say trust can also be a byproduct of if you have that level of transparency and the high performing team are working together to a common goal. If you've done sort of the work around what the vision looks like, then inherently you're going to sort of weed out the wrong fits and ultimately get to a degree of trust. I see.
Well, thanks for picking it up, and it kind of gets back to the hiring piece too, where your goal. Many people who make mistakes in hiring will try to hire for people similar to them or hire people they like. And that's not the goal of hiring. And that's biased. It's bad for, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's bad for performance to just, as a leader, try to hire people you feel comfortable with. Like that's not the goal. The goal is to hire people who can deliver the performance you need. And I kind of joke sometimes and say, and if you hire someone who's a little different from you, but they really deliver the performance you need, you will like them too. But like, don't hire because you like somebody. That's like not a good approach to hiring. It's not one of the who approaches. Don't hire who you like.
Yeah.
And don't hire with your gut. Hire with your brain and hire with the scorecard. That's the mindset of the winning teams.
It's pretty clinical, guys. Like it's you build your scorecard and you've got a rating system, and if you get into a tiebreaker, then you might look at the notes. But ultimately, it takes away any of the guesswork out of your hiring process. Is really what you've set up here. I want to talk a little bit more. I'll ask you the question rather. A little bit more about ghSMART. You've clearly built a business that's stood the test of time. Said 27 years now, concurrently running, and you're a pretty large business now. What's the head count, or I don't know what numbers you use?
Yeah, we're a little over 150 people, doing over 100 million in revenue, and it's a very high dollars per person ratio, and we've been growing at about 25% a year every year for the last 10 years. So it's like a steady growth. Decent scale, and we're just kind of in the early stages of globalization and digitization of what we're working on. So those are some of the themes today. But my goal is quite literally to build one of the most admired, respected businesses in the world. So it's a multi decade approach, and as measured by colleagues, clients, and shareholders and communities. So those are the people who matter most. Yeah, and so
So you mentioned multi-decade approach. So I guess that comes back to when you're building up the vision, right? And you're looking into the future. How far out, and also what is that? How blurry does the roadmap look? Sort of 10.
Yeah. So let's see here. That's a hard question. Your earlier one about the economic value of getting hiring right. I had that one. This one, yeah, I don't know. I think as founders, it's helpful to have a 20-year vision. I don't think it's healthy to be like, 3 to 4 years, let's have an exit, and like that's all that matters. I think it's more interesting to think about creating something of lasting value for the people who work at the company, for the customers, and that sort of thing. So it can be a little bit foggy, but I don't know. I picture ghSMART at a $10 billion size 16 years from now, which is 30% growth for 6 years and 20% growth for 10 years after that. Because that 20% growth, you increase by tenfold every 10 years. So that's easy math, right? So if you want to 10x something, you grow it at 20% a year for 10 years. So, okay. So then if I go, that's the kind of scale of impact we want to have. Well, where should we be? All right. We're in 3 countries today. I think I want to be in like 20 countries, in 15 years from now. It sounds about right. We don't need to be in 150 countries, but kind of like a blueberry pancake of, 20 countries dotted around the world, major centers of leadership and finance would be, where we'd be. And then, you just sort of say, all right, do we think we'd have 7 or 8 products, or maybe we'd have more? And in our vision, we'd have a core consulting business with this sort of 10 to 15 core services we offer. And then we will likely create new business models as we go here to provide leaders with tools and maybe more of a software play and other ways of supporting them and being successful and building their teams. So I don't know. I think getting excited about your why and having some sense for order of magnitude is helpful. And then we have like a very specific 5-year plan with very specific WIGs, to use your 4DX framework, that things we kind of have to get done right now in order to continue along this journey of success. And that whole like kind of 15, 20-year vision of why and how, to what extent, and then a 5-year plan on who and who's doing what by when to move us along feels like a healthy bifurcation of the vision into 2 different timeframes.
Yeah, that's very illuminating for me. delving a little deeper here. I'm really starting to turn the gas up on you, but it's not every day
Sure.
I get to sit down with you. When you talk about a 5-year WIG, so is the details on year 5, as you know, and for those listening and for those not as familiar with a WIG, like it's literally 1 or 2 sentences. It's a very, very simply constructed goal for a 12-month period, typically speaking. I might be incorrect here. And then what are the lead measures? What are the things that we can actually impact inside of our business today, or the team members inside of our business, to actually achieve that one goal? So will you have it very ironclad and defined, like everyone understands on maybe a quarterly basis what the output needs to be achieved?
Yeah.
And then, are you sort of expanding out, or is it literally like you've got 5 years? Again, you've been around for 27 years, so you've had a bit of time to think about real systems and process and people and all these things. But
I think
sort of what level?
Something that's been very helpful for us is 90-90-20. So I don't remember. I'd love to give credit where credit's due, but across our journeys, we've come across many very, very successful business leaders. Someone mentioned the value of just having 3 super simple metrics that you talk about all the time, and you talk about them more. And then when you get tired of talking about them, you talk about them some more. And so for the last 10x growth that we've experienced, we talk a lot about 90-90-20, and 90% client satisfaction is the first one. So we have a whole bunch of other stuff under that, but we measure our client satisfaction every 6 months, and it's well over 90%, but that's super important, and it's something that gets a lot of attention, and it's measurable. 90% team retention kind of gets to the culture piece, where people are really feeling like this is a great place to do work, where they can make an impact, make money, have freedom. They're going to stay. And if they don't feel that way, they're going to leave. And so you can't argue with, it is what it is. The retention rate is so 90% retention in an industry that has only about 60% retention, 70% retention. That's a tough one to achieve. And then the third one was 20% pre-tax profit growth. So if you are over investing in stuff and losing money and the firm's going like that, that's unhealthy. If you're, making a decent return and growing that free cash flow, then you're healthy. It's kind of like oxygen, right? Like profits in a business are like oxygen. So 90-90-20, every one of our monthly dashboards that has probably 30 other metrics on it. But at the very top, the first half, there are 2 pages to it. The first half of the first page is just, are we at 90? Yes or no? Are we at 90? Yes or no? Are we at 20? Yes or no? And, you see the chart and like, there it is. But that clarity really helps anybody at the firm, from senior people to new staffers who join. Like, they know 90-90-20, and they know in an instant, in a sentence, whether we're healthy or not healthy based on how we triangulate on the customers, team, and money. Beyond that, there will be like so that's the kind of lag measures, like that's the outcomes, right? Of these like 90-90-20 kind of things. And then for a given year and the quarters within the year, it's like, are we going to launch this London office or not? Okay, we are. Great. What's the plan around that? What are the revenue expectations? All this kind of stuff. So a few years ago, we had a bunch of hoopla. We launched a London office. It's been very successful. Today it accounts for over 20% of the revenue and profits of the whole business. So it's all good. But those are the kind of like, year to year priorities. And they're only about, 2 or 3 at any given time, that then, provide the team with the focus areas. So, or you can think of one of my colleagues. So Randy Street, he co-authored the Who book. We co-authored it together. He's been a ghSMART colleague for, I think, 19 years now. He has a theory of constraints, and he was managing partner of ghSMART. He managed the firm and led the firm during our last 10x growth, from 10 million to 100 million in revenue. And he used to talk about the theory of constraints, which I think is very helpful for entrepreneurs, which is, what's the thing that's constraining you? And like, what's the number one thing constraining you? And whatever that is, like, blast it out of the water, like take that on with full vigor. And then there will be the next constraint, and then either anticipate it, or, if you're really smart, you anticipate it and you start working on it before it rears its ugly head and becomes the big constraint. But I'll just to share here, I think hiring enough people at ghSMART was one of our early constraints, and then we solved it by bringing on more recruiters and really, just dialing up the money and emphasis on recruiting people. Professional development weirdly became the second constraint, where we had all these people and they're doing great work and they're brilliant, but they were so hungry for learning and more codification of the training. So that became a big emphasis. We hired a professional, a whole team, a department, codified materials, all this kind of stuff. So that the constraint shifted from recruiting the people to training the people. Business development and demand generation, marketing, branding, that kind of stuff. Our website's old and dumb looking relative to, we kind of take pride in how substantive and how much real steak there is here versus the sizzle, that to a fault. So BD, branding, we're going to clean that stuff up right now. Geography expansion, we've only really launched one international office. It was successful, but that will soon be a constraint that we'll need to have a person in charge. That's another thing. Always have someone's in charge of whatever constraint it is. And then, goals and budgets are around it. And then the next constraint we anticipate will be around services, innovation, digitization, and basically just making sure we're always on the cutting edge of having the very best stuff and using, current technologies in order to help enhance the ghSMART experience. And then I think something around acquisitions, we've never done an acquisition. We don't plan on doing one in the short term, but in the medium term, we sort of sense that's another way you can obviously add complementary products. For example, is through acquisition. So acquisition and capital strategy will come next. So that's it. It was like recruiting was a constraint, then it shifted to professional development. And then once you have a bunch of people and they're well-trained, demand and brand really become a good focus. Solutions and products next after that. And then, sort of geography and acquisitions and capital strategy. And that's about it. There kind of aren't, an infinite number of constraints, but that's the journey of constraints that we've been managing through.
I mean, I'm taking notes for my life right here because it's fantastic stuff. I want to be mindful of your time. We're about to literally go over here, and I could honestly sit here for the next 5 hours asking.
I have a few. Yeah, sure. I have a few extra minutes. It's not a problem, and you're a lot of fun to talk with. So this is a great pleasure.
Okay. Thank you. In coming to that, and again, I'm significantly behind in terms of my experience and the evolution of our business and where we're going, but it's just really resonating with me in terms of, the problems that come up and how you approach them, and, very, very meticulous and methodical in how you sort of identified and understood, right, this is the next problem that we're going to face. We're going to throw the kitchen sink at it and solve for it. And then the next one evolves. And it's a challenge. It's fun. It keeps it interesting. But how do you approach actually making sure that you get all the best minds in the room together in identifying that, well, this is the problem that we're going to face and this is how we're going to solve it? Is that something that's run different to your wigs and your direction? Like, are you having separate strategy meetings, or how does that even come?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question, because I think it's very important to know that you're focusing on the right things. I guess the word informal comes to mind when you ask that question for our personal experience. Like this fall, for example, we're allocating budget for all the regions to do extra sort of 2-day offsites, and they're very simple. It's really just catching up and hanging out, and then just talking about what are the most important things you're working on, what are what's going well, what's not going well. It's just hard work and energy to stay in touch with bright minds, and to be able to really come together and figure out the prioritization. So I think informal for bottoms up, getting the right topics on the table, and then formally, I think it's fine once a year, unless you're hyper growth. Like if we're growing 25% a year, I think it's fine once a year to decide what the priorities are for the coming year or two. And that's a little bit more of a formal process, where we call it 3D, which is discuss, debate, and decide. So whenever we're thinking, oh, okay, international expansion, is it time? Is it now is the time, or is now not the time? Well, let's 3D that question in the fall. And it's really a matter of putting it up against other priorities. I think it's I think others do a better job than we do at creating like discounted cash flow analyses by strategy. Oh, this one's a huge grower. This one's a smaller grower. I think we do a pretty good job of making relative decisions on this is more important than that. This is less important than that. And then once you have the order, allocating dollars and people to the top three priorities. That's kind of the way we do it. It almost feels like cheating because in an ideal world, we'd have economic analyses of, 20 things that we could potentially look at. But the way we do it is let's talk about informally to get the list of 20, and then let's really through relative emphasis, what's important, more important, having digitization of our core service offerings or having an Australian office. Like, okay, well, and then it turns into getting, economics alert here. Do you remember expected value? Expected value is basically the money you think it could make at full potential times the probability you think of its being successful. So us going to Australia is kind of a medium to lower total value potential, but a very high probability of success because we have Louis, who's from the region, and we have an amazing group of people and existing clients there. So it's actually a very high probability of success and kind of a medium economic driver. So it's probably going to get the thumbs up versus some other stuff that could be more exotic or aggressive and could end up creating more value, but that has a much lower probability of success. Those, end up sliding down the list a bit. But, just being very open about like, hey, I think this thing has a, low economic value potentially, but it's good for clients. It's good for our people. It's a high probability of success. I vote for doing that. Okay, great. Where's everyone? And then, there's the helpful devil's advocate who will show up in the room who says, hey, if all we're doing are the safe bets, we're not really being innovative to the extent we could. Why don't we do a portfolio of mostly safe bets, but a couple higher risk kind of horizon 2, horizon 3 bets? And I love that conversation because then we all go, yeah, that makes sense, right? Let's lean on and hang our hat on a small number of priorities that we are very confident are going to be successful and important. And then let's go ahead and through good delegation and some good sorting, give an experiment, give some freedom and oxygen to experimentation to happen and do some planned experiments that might work out or might not work out. And I think that's a very healthy mindset and a very difficult one for founders to really balance. Do you really do the things that will be successful that have lower upside? And how do you balance that with the, kind of moonshot ideas that could be tremendously successful and really life-changing?
Yeah, that is a fantastic, that's the answer I was looking for and more. I think, when you think about the entrepreneurial journey, for a lot of people, we talked about it earlier, just getting a plan in effect and driving toward it is really great. But now, when you start to get a lot more strategic, it's, overlaying that economic value to the business. And then once it's, what's the probability of success? And then, what is the brand equity in what we're delivering and how it all ties together really sort of lets you formulate, I guess, a 3D approach to why you'd make that decision. So really, again, valuable to anyone listening because you can apply it to your business. I also notice your McKinsey's 3 Horizons methodology as well. Maybe again, I'd love to ask you, but I also want to be cognizant of your time here. But if you're happy to go into it, maybe again, I think it'll be really valuable to the audience. It's something that we practice as well internally and where we're trying to transform the multiply media.
No, I don't have a whole lot of extra content there. It's I think our lessons learned and working with very innovative companies is it takes different people and different cycles of learning and different models if you want to do things that are going to be successful right now, that horizon 1 versus in a couple of years horizon 2, or more pure R&D that might one day pay off horizon 3. So that's so the who answer to that question is who are the right people to run those different cycles, and they're different. There's different people. Reliability ends up being premium for that first bucket, and then just sort of discontinuous creative thinking, empathy. It's really important for the third bucket of R&D. Yeah, so I don't know if we're a $10 billion company, multi-business, just a portfolio of leadership companies here as ghSMART in 15 years. You can ask me more about how successful we were in our Horizon 1, 2, and 3 investments. For up till now, the game we've mostly been playing is to deliver outstanding service to clients and to be very fast to innovate at the margin to give them what they need and want. And I'd say we've underinvested in some of the, can't see around corners 10 years out. What's the future of employment? How are people going to get jobs 10 years from now, 20 years from now? So just in the last short few years, we've invested more in machine learning, AI, type solutions to put more probabilities around people's fit to role. And I think that kind of work will be more helpful as digital solutions become more available and less expensive to help people connect with their dream jobs. Like ultimately, I love it if more people were in their dream jobs. I'll leave you with this last stat, which Gallup organization, they do all the surveys and political polling. I read somewhere that on a Gallup survey, only 13% of people love their jobs globally. And that's not high enough. That's terrible. Think about, or framed more positively, think about how you can elevate the quality of human life by having more people in jobs they love. So, I'm of the opinion that AI is not going to completely obsolete all humans and that all activity will be automated in the future. I think, as long as there are humans, there are going to be jobs, and the greater percent of humans who are in jobs they love has a very direct effect on people's mental health and on the global economy. So here's to using technology and great practices to help more people find their way into great jobs and then be successful once they land there.
I feel like I could taste a few of the breadcrumbs into H1 and H2 of what ghSMART might be delving into there. But I'll leave that for the interview that I'll hold you to 15 years from now to see if it was all successful. Geoff, I don't want to take up any more of your time. It's been such a pleasure, and you've been such a good sport. Can't thank you enough.
Great. Pleasure. Congrats on all of your success. I think 15 years from now, I'll be interviewing you for our next book then on how to successfully grow and scale digital businesses with great cultures as you've been doing so far, Yoni. So thank you for this. I enjoyed it tremendously, and I look forward to staying in touch.